Chapter 19. An Arrest. Aslan Appa was fleet-footed, but before he could overtake the messenger, he apparently realized that Ned, Burt, and Dave were after the boy. The bearded, mustached suspect suddenly turned and went down the side street. A traffic policeman stood on the corner. Aisha spoke to him, briefly telling him that one of their party might have been kidnapped. "We think that the man we were chasing may be the guilty person." At once, the officer began running with the girls. "There he goes!" George cried out. "Into that garden!" The pursuers rushed in after him, and the officer found the man, crouched down, hiding behind some low-growing evergreens. "He's the one, all right," Nancy said, seeing a gold filigree bracelet studded with turquoise on one arm. "His name is Aslan Appa." The suspect, realizing he was cornered, was silent. Nancy went on. "Officer, I accuse this man of having entered my home in the United States and of trying to steal a special rug made here in Istanbul. Later, he came back and left a scimitar to frighten me." George spoke up. "He was making scimitars and master keys to sell without a license and was wanted by the police in the United States." Nancy added, "One of the girls in our group has disappeared. We think he is holding her somewhere, probably for ransom." Remembering the note in her pocket, she read it quickly and said, "Here is a message ordering me to give information about a treasure secreted in a mannequin. Otherwise, my kidnapped friend will not be released." Aslan Appa panicked and tried to climb over a garden wall near him, but the officer dragged him back and held on tightly. "I will request my superior to send a police car," the officer said. "Please to watch the prisoner." Nancy and George moved closer to Aslan Appa, while the policeman used his shortwave radio to call headquarters. Aslan Appa's face was livid. His eyes bored into Nancy's as he said, "You can prove nothing against me." Just then they saw a police car coming up the street. The policeman marched Aslan Appa out of the garden and the others followed. At the same time, a taxi pulled up. In it were Bess, Ned, Burt, and Dave. "Bess!" George shrieked. The young people got out of the taxi and Ned paid the driver. "You're all right?" George asked her cousin. "I am now," Bess replied. Then she caught sight of the prisoner. Quickly, Nancy told her who he was. "Aslan Appa!" Bess cried out. Pointing her finger at him, she added, "You're the one who engineered my kidnapping." "Tell us about it," Nancy begged. The traffic officer said he must return to his post. The two who had come in the police car would take care of the prisoner. At her friend's urging, Bess told of the kidnapping. "The boy who lied to me about where you all had gone and locked me in is Aslan Appa's brother. He came back to the place after delivering the letter to you, Nancy. I told the people at the rug shop I had never heard of such a treasure and that we hadn't found the mannequin," Bess went on. "But they didn't believe me. I wondered how long I would have to stay." Bess looked gratefully at the three boys. "Just when I was feeling about as low as I could," she said, "Aslan Appa's brother returned. When he unlocked the door and let himself in, Dave, Burt, and Ned jumped him. Dave grabbed my hand and said, 'Come on!' and we all ran like mad out of that bazaar." The two officers wrote down the names of Bess and Nancy and requested that they come to police headquarters at once. "Where are we going to find your dad?" Ned asked. "I'd say we need the services of a lawyer." Aisha offered to telephone the Cockton home. Fortunately, Mr. Drew was there and amazed at what had taken place. "I'll come directly to police headquarters." The others had to wait a short while for him. When he came, Aisha smiled at Mr. Drew. "There are many legal problems when a foreign tourist is involved," she said. "I am so glad that you are an attorney." The Turkish authorities expressed embarrassment that one of their countrymen had abducted an American citizen and acted so badly in the United States. Aslan Appa and his family had been arrested. The officers hurried with the necessary procedures so Bess and the Drews could leave. By the time they were over, everyone in the group, including Mr. Drew, said he was starving. "Let's go back to that lovely hotel and have lunch," Nancy proposed. They walked to it and ate heartily while discussing the latest events in the mystery. After the serious subjects had been discussed, Bess came in for plenty of teasing, including a jibe from Burt that of all the pretty girls in Istanbul, Aslan Appa had to pick her to take into his family. She made a face at Burt. George grinned. You had your wish. You met a handsome Turkish man. During the exchange of banter, Nancy noticed that while Aisha smiled at the jokes, she had a sort of sweet, sad expression. Her mind is on Farouk, Nancy thought. I must help her. Presently she called to Aisha. Are you ready for some more sightseeing? We'll look for shoeshine stands and rug shops to see if we can locate Farouk. That would be wonderful, the Turkish girl replied. But first I want to take you to the Blue Mosque. See the 7 domes framed by those tall spires? Aisha said. The Sultan who built them kept adding one after another so that he would always be ahead of any other sultan. No one ever matched the number 7. At the main door, the visitors removed their shoes. It was dim in the interior, but presently their eyes became accustomed to it. At the far end of the mosque, men were on their knees, their foreheads close to the floor. They were praying. Some distance behind them was a group of Turkish women in the same position. They wore long black dresses with full sleeves that covered their arms completely, and their large black veils entirely hid their hair and faces. The women are not allowed to go up front until the men leave, Aisha explained. The visitors stood still, looking up at the exquisite arched ceiling with its mosaic pattern, much of it in gold. The boys were awed by the electric candles, which were 77 feet high. Nancy was intrigued by the gorgeous prayer rugs that lay on the floor around her. There was enough light from the doorway for her to study the pattern in one of them. A moment later, she saw something that excited her. She whispered to Aisha, "In that rug, part of the pattern looks like marble columns rising out of water." As Aisha nodded, Nancy said, "In the rug that Farouk sent, there was something like that. I admit I didn't think it had any significance, but maybe it does." "Oh, I believe it does," Aisha said. "It could indicate the Great Cistern." "Where's that?" Nancy asked. Aisha said it was in Istanbul. They would go there at once. It might mean the place where Farouk was going to meet us. She motioned to the others to leave the mosque. When they were in the bus once more, she directed the driver to take them to the Great Cistern. Aisha explained that it was an enormous underground reservoir and had been built in the 4th century by Constantine the Great. At that time, there was much jealousy among the sultans and nations, and wars were going on. The sultan in Istanbul was afraid the city might be besieged, and though the people could hold out for a long time behind the Great Wall, if they did not have water to drink, they would die. Water coming into it underground could not be cut off by the enemy. The cistern was enlarged in the 6th century by the Emperor Justinian. Despite Aisha's interesting story, the others were not prepared for the tremendous sight they found at the foot of a stone stairway. The place was like a gigantic swimming pool, with columns rising from the bottom to the floor of the building above it. "Wow!" Burt exclaimed. "There's enough water in here to keep a whole army from getting thirsty." Aisha smiled. "I understand that in olden days the water was deeper. It's rather shallow now. You might be interested in the dimensions of this place. It's 420 by 200 feet, and it has 336 columns. Is it still used?" Nancy asked, going to the edge and looking down into the clear water. "No, not anymore. But in an emergency, I suppose it could be." Ned remarked about the ceiling, which was fluted and arched between columns. The others looked up. Everyone was so intent on the exquisite architecture that they failed to notice a figure slinking toward them. Quick as a flash, he came up behind Nancy and gave her a hard push. She tumbled into the cistern and hit the side of her head on the bottom. End of chapter 19.